My intros are really fucking awkward. Welcome to Lowriters. This is a writing studio. I'm Zach Quinones. I am a screenwriter. Uh, Mostly failures, some successes. Still working on that intro. The video for today that we're going to be doing is talking about 6 mistakes that I make or have made as a screenwriter. These aren't mistakes that I continue to make per se, but I do find myself sometimes having a default into them. And they're mistakes that a lot of screenwriters and even just creative people in general make. So I'm just going to kind of go through them real quick. Why 6? Why not 10? Because I just could only think of 6. I might do a second video later. So the first one is, as a screenwriter, probably one of the biggest mistakes I made, especially in the early days of screenwriting, which I think everybody's going to make, is your ego and letting your ego get the best of you. Now, that can be defined in a lot of ways. For me, and I think for a lot of screenwriters, the ego mistake that we make is thinking that our work is way more important than it is. I think this is especially important for early screenwriters to understand, and even for more experienced screenwriters, is that even though we're very closely attached to our work and we may put in a lot of effort, ultimately at the end of the day, we have to understand that the filmmaking process involves, if your script ever even gets made, producers, actors, directors, all of that. It's going to get messed with. It's going to change. Some of the things that you feel are super important are not going to be very important to other people. And they may be right about it. They may be wrong. But there's a fine line between standing up and sort of defending your work and standing your ground and letting ego get the best of you. And pun intended, you have to look at the bigger picture. And for me, I think early on, when I wrote my first like feature-length screenplay, my ego was that this is going to be really important, and that when I make it, when I finish it, and when I shoot it and all that, it's going to be super important. Everybody needs to see it, and it's going to be great, and blah, 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 this, and that. That's very possible that it can be, but we have to always keep ourselves in check and take a step back and understand that ultimately what we're doing, it's an artistic endeavor, it's creative, but we're not changing the world. We're not curing cancer. We're not feeding the hungry and people that are starving and impoverished. So it can be very important. It can be very impactful, but we need to always understand where that limit of ego goes, and also ego in terms of being self-aware of where our levels of skill is at. That doesn't mean let people demoralize you or insult your work, but we can't get so egotistical that we think we're a lot more skilled than we are. We have to understand what level we're at that time. The second thing, and this is more, I guess, on the business side of it, but one of the big mistakes I made as a screenwriter, especially when I started making money and like getting gigs, was I took a break. If I had never taken that break, I probably could have kept a much more maintained and consistent freelancing career, so to speak. I got to a point where I was booking at least one screenwriting gig a month, and it could be anywhere from a couple $100 to a couple $1,000 gigs. But I did that maybe for 6, 7 months straight, and it was usually at least one a month. I would get sometimes 2, 4, whatever. And then at one point I just felt I could take a couple months off. I'm doing this consistently. It's not going to be hard to just jump right back in. It really was. You lose a lot of momentum taking a break, and it could be really hard. But I think this is most important early on when you're starting your freelance writing career, and not just for screenwriting, any type of writing in general. When you really get a good rhythm going, just stick it out. I was maybe going on a year, a year and a half straight of doing this, and I really believe that I just would have like toughed it out for 3 or 4 years, I could have earned the right to really take a break, because I would have built up a consistent clientele base to where after a month or two, I could have just hopped right back in. The third thing is, let's see, overstaying my welcome. What I mean by those are two ways. That is both in a collaborative essence and a writing essence. So in the writing essence, Overstaying My Welcome with a script. Sometimes you just have to say, fuck it. The script isn't working out. I'm not going to see it through. There's no shame in quitting. There really isn't. I watched the UFC. If some of these guys didn't quit, they'd have their arm broken in half. So kind of see it the same way when you're writing. You're kind of getting put into submission. If you don't quit, you're going to break your arm in half, metaphorically, and it will affect your writing in the future. So don't overstay your welcome. You have to be able, and this kind of ties back into ego, you have to be able to say, you know what, I'm biting off more than I can chew. I don't have what it takes right now to execute this the way I want. I'm done. The other way in terms, and this is sort of, again, on the business freelance side, is when you are collaborating with somebody and it can be in all aspects, whether you're negotiating your rate, whether you're actually creatively involved in something. Sometimes you have to, if it's just not working out and going in the way you want it, you don't have to see that through either. You can take a step back and be like, okay, I'm overstaying my welcome. I'm not contributing anything to this effectively or positively. I need to step away and just let things be. The fourth thing is, this is on the writing aspect, too many rewrites or not enough rewrites. You can over rewrite your script. I don't know if you've ever seen a movie and it comes to an ending and you're like, that was beautiful. And then another scene pops up and you're like, why is there another scene after this? And then another scene pops up. It's just like you had the ending 2 scenes earlier. It's the same thing with with your screenplay. A lot of times people rewrite, and they get it to the perfect, most complete version, because it's never going to be perfect. Especially if you're trying to make it into a movie, it's going to get changed. So you want to get it to as close to perfect as possible, and just stop. Stop touching it. And of course, the opposite of that is not enough rewrites. You do a script, a first draft, half a rewrite, maybe another quarter of a rewrite, and you think it's done. You have to get it to a place where it can actually move forward into the actual aspect of being made into a movie. And there's another video I'm going to do later about the difference between writing a screenplay and writing a movie. Those are 2 different things, even though they overlap a lot. Now, the other thing is, one mistake that I always made was being too generous with receiving feedback. I know early on as like a beginner writer, you want everybody to read and you want everybody to give you as much feedback as possible. That's good to an extent, but you can really put too much on your plate to where if you're not really seasoned or you haven't really been trained on how to receive and curate feedback, you can find yourself in just a whole lot of chaos, especially when it comes to the screenwriting. So you can't be too nice. You can't be too generous with with how you receive feedback. It is totally fine to be selective and to disregard. Even if people are like, hey, I want to read your script, and you can say like, no, thank you. Because, and that does take time and practice. You are going to get to the point where you're going to make mistakes and realizing certain people aren't good with giving you the feedback that you want. And over time, you're going to be better at it. But early on, if you can just kind of figure out a way to not be so, don't try to please everybody is basically what I'm saying. Don't try to be like the agreeable writer. You can be disagreeable with people. Last thing is being too hard-headed with feedback. Early on, sometimes it was really, really fucking hard for me to accept certain feedback, and I just wouldn't accept it, or I wouldn't even attempt to apply it to my script. One of the best ways to kind of get over this is to don't wait at least a couple days or 2 before you officially reject any feedback. You may reject it in the moment, but you'd be surprised after a couple days you can be like, you know what, that person was right, or they had a really good point. And I think this is also going to help you with figuring out how to defend certain decisions that you make and, respectfully reject feedback as well as receive feedback. But you can't be too hard-headed. You can't, again, this ties back into ego. You can't just be like, oh, they just don't understand it. Ultimately, at the end of the day, they have to understand it. Because if you want this to be made into a movie, the audience has to at least receive 70 to 80% of the message and get 70 to 80% of the film. If it's anything below that, it's going to be a failure. So that's 6. That's 6 of them. Hopefully, maybe I can make some more. I know there's a lot that I could think of, but these were like the 6. I think the most important ones that I think affect early writers and even like veteran senior writers, however you want to call them, still kind of make these mistakes. I sometimes default to this too as well. Sometimes I get really hard-headed by impulsivity of certain feedback, but I always remember like the default isn't my set response. So for those who watch, if you want to comment and tell us anything that you think are big mistakes that writers make early on, some mistakes that you make, please put it in the comments. Also, like, subscribe. What do they put? Like, hit the bell, right? Follow our Instagram. And that's it. More videos coming. I'm still working on the outro.